I'm Małgorzata Hedrick, also of GCD. So it's also important as part of this preparation to think about cultural dimensions. And there are two aspects to it. One is just very pragmatic. If students understand more about the environment in which they will be doing something abroad, they will be more effective. So they will be more successful and the whole group will be more successful. And also there is a dimension, individual dimension, that they will get more out of it for their own development. So that's why we include this routinely with our preparations for students. And as part of that, we think it's important for students to have more awareness about the host culture. So at the very minimum, would be great for them to read some news about the host country before going. But in our experience, students are often curious and want to even read books. We also recommend, as much as possible, in your departments or your units, if you have international students from the host country that are already there, they could get involved with that preparation as well and help. And obviously, student-to-student communication is great in those instances because students really get more out of it than if I just tell them about what might be pertinent to this host culture where they're going. So we very much recommend including that piece with your preparation. Similarly, we often, all of us, we understand cultural difference in contrast. So when we think about host environments, host countries, it's also important for us to reflect on our own culture. That, obviously, in contrast, is done best. So we think about it from the point of view, what is particular about our culture that might be different somewhere else, and that way we can position ourselves better in a more unfamiliar environment. Also, often, from experience, we know that students get asked questions that have to do with their host cultures. So they, for example, US students might be often asked about US politics or US role in the world. And if they are completely unprepared for that, it might be actually a very high stress situation, especially if they are asked about controversial topics related to US politics or US involvement in the world. What is also important here is a nuance that for each student, this reflection, this cultural reflection will be a little bit different. If these are white students, US students, they will be thinking about it in a particular way. If these are underrepresented minority students from US, they will be thinking about it differently as well. So as an example, a student who is from an underrepresented minority might be thinking, how are people of my race treated in this country? What is the context related to race in this country vis-a-vis that situation? So there are nuances related to this. Also, in the international students will be thinking about it very differently because they have made this transition already from the host country to US culture and now possibly going to another context. That's a different mental operation. So in preparation, it's important to acknowledge that we all are on this continuum of understanding cultural difference, and we are somewhere else on this continuum. And based on that, we will be growing in a particular way individually from these experiences. Also, as Josh mentioned, what comes into play is awareness of local customs, cultural norms, religion. So to give you an example for local customs, in a workplace or in a research lab place, what might happen in Spain is that if there is a challenge, if there is a challenging situation, and this might not be always intuitive to us, these conversations typically will not take place in the office context. People sitting in an office and discussing it. They would go and get coffee or talk over meal and bring up those kinds of difficult topics. which might be difficult to make a transition into that if there is no awareness. Similarly, for cultural norms, discussing, or especially criticizing Mao in China, is still very, very controversial. So it's important to be aware of that. Typically, similarly, somebody like Ataturk in Turkey, very highly regarded as a founder of modern Turkey, it has implications if students would be talking about him in very critical terms. So it's this kind of awareness that's important as well. Additionally, in terms of religion, something as simple as for women students bringing scarves with them, so if they're going to the mosque, they will be prepared, especially if it's a smaller mosque that doesn't provide these routinely. So there are some more obvious markers, cultural markers that people know about, and there are others that are more, require some homework. And as Josh mentioned, some of these also cross the line in terms of safety and security, where in some cases, something might be punishable by law, might be even punishable by law very strictly. And it's important for students to be, for everybody, but for students in particular, because we are looking out for them to be aware of these things. And along these lines, there is actually an instrument called Intercultural Development Inventory, which allows us, all of us as individuals, to take a survey and to have an opportunity to see where we perceive ourselves on this continuum of cultural awareness and where developmentally we are at the moment. And that's obviously getting much more involved with these issues, with these dimensions, but it's worthwhile to do if at all possible. So these are just some signals to tell you there is a lot bundled together in that cultural awareness and cultural preparation. And the more we invest in that as individuals and help students invest in that, the better experience they will have in country. So following up on what Josh was talking about in terms of preparation, some very important aspects, what again we see from experience is that for students in particular, the information resonates differently once they are already in the context. We always give these pre-departure orientations and we cover as much ground as we can. And we know from experience that for some of these considerations to actually resonate, students have to be in the context. So that's where it's important, once the group gets to the place, to repeat some of these pieces of information, to really reinforce those messages. So from that point of view, it would be important to remind the group about the local safety issues, including the cultural norms, customs, etc. To talk about the US Embassy registration and the fact that that's a resource. Local emergency numbers, hospitals, things like that. Just because we cannot rely on the fact that the students necessarily remember this, but those are very important considerations. Also, discussing common health and safety issues. We again find in our work that behavior, it's a very important determinant of student safety. So again, students being in the context, they will hear more of that. So it will be important to repeat for either the trip leader or somebody who is actually bringing the group together as they start working on the ground. So what we hear often through different type of reporting in our field, sending students abroad, is alcohol is one of those factors that causes all sorts of other problems to happen. Obviously, drugs, even more of a problem. Also, transportation, especially cars, are a very high risk factor, especially abroad, because when people don't don't know the road conditions, they don't quite understand the driver culture, it obviously amplifies the risks. In some countries, something like petty theft, pickpocketing is much more prevalent than in other places. So that's also something to be aware of and thinking about. There might be other examples of very particular risk factors. So for example, pedestrian safety in some countries is particularly important to think about. So crossing the street might be much more risky in some locations than in other locations. So things like that. It's also important to test emergency response protocol on site to actually know that it works. It might be something that, might be sort of difficult to actually get to, but it will be important to think about, because if it's untested, it's very challenging. And again, just talking to colleagues in our field, we know that putting these protocols into place under emergency conditions is very challenging. And then we get to the third part that Josh discussed. As we think about the preparation, participation, and reflection, this gets to the reflection part, which might be a little challenging to implement, but would be very worthwhile to do. So this has to do with individual self-reflection that hopefully students will do upon return, but would be even better to be able to bring groups together and really discuss what have we gained, what have we learned, and help people process what they have encountered. And if that processing doesn't happen, it sometimes even, if there were particular challenges and difficult situations, this particularly needs to be processed. And for young people, it's even additionally more important to have that kind of support so they can think things through, and actually sometimes perhaps they would even come to incorrect conclusions about cultural dimensions of situations or other aspects. And if that is not really explained, discussed, it might linger, and they might go again to that context, to this country, to that context again, and will not be really any better prepared. So it's important to do. And on the programmatic level, beyond the student self-reflection, if you're planning to do this again, if you're planning to have these programs go on again and again, it's important to evaluate and improve. So we would definitely recommend that.